Canada is spying on its own citizens by keeping judges in the dark to bypass the law in order to outsource the job to foreign spying agencies. Federal Judge Richard Mosley says that since 2009, the country's spying agency has deliberately misled him on numerous occasions to issue a large number of warrants to spy on Canadian citizens abroad. In return, the spy agency had given the judge fake assurances that the surveillance was to be carried out from inside Canada. But in reality, Canada's outsourced the job to foreign spy agencies from the US, the UK, Australia, and New Zealand. Under the law of the country, Canadian federal courts have no jurisdiction in this regard and cannot issue warrants that involve surveillance of Canadian citizens by foreign intelligence agencies. Joshua Blakeney, our correspondent, joins us now from Calgary, Alberta, Canada. Joshua, please explain the details of this story for us and also about the ramifications of what is taking place.
Yes, well, Judge Mosley has shown some backbone this year because he was the judge who in May confirmed that the Harper government seized a majority of seats in Canada's parliament in a fraudulent election. He confirmed that Canada suffered from election fraud in the election that brought the current government to power. And now he's criticized Canada's intelligence services for basically trying to deceive the courts, to break the law in order to allow them to justify collaborating with overseas intelligence agencies in the spying on Canadian citizens. Now, this obviously has to be understood in the historical context, which is that Canada's intelligence agency, like other Western intelligence agencies, had a cushy deal, had a sweet deal in the Cold War, where they had the Soviet Union as a perennial enemy, and then that enemy disappeared, and their big salaries weren't justified by an enemy. And enter the war on terror. During the war on terror, ever since what many have argued is a false flag attack on 9/11, we've had many lies, a tissue of lies sold to the Canadian public that there's something called international Islamic terrorism, and that's the premise of all these Western intelligence agencies justifying taking billions of dollars of taxpayer money, that we have a terrorist threat which they have to protect us from. Now, statistics do show that one is more likely to die from lightning than die from terrorism in Canada. And so you have this big problem for the intelligence agencies that they've built up this big bubble of lies and they're worried that it's going to burst. And so they're working with foreign intelligence agencies, obviously with Israel being the primary master at the core of all this lie-telling, to spy on Canadian citizens, perhaps possibly to set them up. We know the Canadian intelligence agencies have very much enjoyed coming on TV in recent years and saying, oh, we've saved you from a terror attack. And often people have alleged that you have Islamic individuals being set up by these intelligence agencies in order to perpetuate this myth that there's a terrorist threat. So it's a very complicated thing to understand, and it can only be understood in the historical context of these intelligence agencies losing their enemy at the end of the Cold War and then having to invent this big lie of Islamic terrorism. So there's no justification for spying on Canadians overseas. There probably are Canadian citizens, for example, fighting with resistance groups in the south of Lebanon and so on, but there's no evidence that they want to attack Canada. And so really there's no justification for this whole police state apparatus that's been erected since the events of 9/11 in this country. There's no terrorist threat, and yet these intelligence agents, of course, want to justify their big salaries. So it's a story of lies and deception, and of course it's the Canadian taxpayer who works hard throughout the year who's having to foot the bills for all this lie-telling and war-making by the Canadian state.
Thank you very much, Joshua. Press TV's Joshua Blakeney joining us from Calgary.